We've been on the run, everybody run, looking out for number one. California, here we come, right back where we started from. Hustlers, get your guns, everybody run. Looking out for number one, California, here we come, right back where we started from. Welcome back, everyone, to another video from Movies and TVs on the Ball. This is OC, One Tree in the OC, Episode 3, OC Episode 2, called The Model House. This one came out, was released in 2003. August 12th was released August 12th, 2003. And this episode was written by Josh Schwartz, creator, and directed by none other than Doug Liman, who you probably know from the director of films such as Edge of Tomorrow and the original Bourne Identity. He also did Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and he's recently worked on Roadhouse remake for Amazon Prime. Um, so this episode starts out where Ryan and Seth, they've kind of made a bond. It's Ryan's last night hanging out with the Coens. And I love the fact that the episode is they're hanging out by the pool, and and Seth is sort of asking him, making suggestions for their night, for his last night, if he wants to go see an IMAX movie, just hang out, do something. And Ryan is pretty much like, I really would like to just hang out here. So about they're about to have dinner, um, and they're sitting down by the table, and Seth says this is kind of the first time that we've kind of sat down as a family and eaten. We usually just get takeout, and I think this is the first. He mentions that this is the first time that Kristen's cooked, in which Kristen says, I always cook. And I love the fact that um, um, Seth says, well, don't you remember the meatloaf of 98? And, and but uh, but it's kind of interesting that Ryan is still, or not interesting, but I've noticed that Ryan still, thanks them for their hospitality, for the food and the hospitality. Then at the end of dinner, Ryan signs a paper that makes him legally part of the state. Sandy tells him that they're going to meet with his social worker in the morning and have him kind of get settled in to become sort of in the system. And I like the fact that he also tells them that they'll find foster homes for teenagers, in which Seth makes a crack that says, yes, because everybody would want a brand new teenager, wouldn't they? And Seth then makes the suggestion that, they have all this room. Why doesn't he still stay here? But they suggest that, we've talked about this. They talked about this, and that they are just, he's going to be part of the state. Ryan, so even though Seth is telling Ryan that, he's trying to make suggestions for Ryan to stay, Ryan says it's okay, and he signs the papers. And you can kind of tell, and what I like about it is you tell that Ryan feels a little bit like, he's sad about it, and he's, kind of disappointed in it, and kind of walks away, and he says it's okay. He signs the papers, And then uh, that's kind of basically the start of the opening of the episode, which I think is interesting, which is, you know, interesting. So after the credits roll, it's late at night, and Ryan is sneaking out of the pool house to kind of find a new place to live. Seth wakes up and suggests that, why don't you stay here, and we could, you want to just hang out and play some PlayStation? And Ryan says, yeah, well, I could possibly um, uh, I could possibly um, uh, I could probably get a job, get some money, and go. And I like the fact that he's wearing the same. I like the fact that Ryan is wearing the same outfit that he wore at the beginning of the first episode. His kind of black, his kind of hoodie, and his black leather jacket. So then um, Seth sees him and suggests that, I'll tag along with you, and we could probably kind of, get out and, kind of get a place together, or get a place together. So Ryan agrees, and uh, Seth heads over to his room to make sort of a makes sort of a just, kind of a distraction to make sure he's still to fake the fact that he's still asleep in his bedroom. So Seth is, getting supplies, getting ready to sneak out, and then he hears a knock on the door, and it's Sandy. And Sandy, he looks like he's been up all night thinking about Ryan and wants to kind of talk to Seth about Ryan. And Seth says, there's nothing really to talk about. We should just put uh, kind of Ryan's life in just the authorities. And but he says it kind of snarkily, and which Sandy kind of says there's no need for sarcasm. And he's like, look, I didn't mean to be sarcastic. Um, Sandy says, if you want to talk about it, I'm here for you. He says, yeah, there's nothing really needing to talk about it. And he ends up going back to bed. Once the door shuts, Ryan Beth jumps out of bed and uh, heads down to the end of the end of the driveway uh, to meet Ryan. Ryan's already out there, kind of waiting for Seth, when he notices Mirisa coming down the driveway on her cell phone, talking to Summer with a birthday uh, gift under her arm, and it's sort of this meet cute, kind of in the same way they met in the pilot, where as Marissa's getting ready to get in her car, she sees she sees Ryan. She sees Ryan and starts Ryan, and they start up a conversation, and Ryan and she's like, I didn't think I'd see you again. And she says, she thanks him for not for the other night. Kind of, makes a comment about, do you really drink that much? And she kind of looks a little bit annoyed about it. Then um, Then she says, kind of changes the subject by saying, "I thought you left." And he's like, "I did. I'm leaving now." And then all of a sudden, Seth runs down the driveway and sees Marissa, and they have this awkward kind of conversation. He says, "We're just hanging out." And then Seth notices that Marissa has a package under present under her arm, and he says, "I bet my invitation got lost in the mail." And she's like, "It's for Summer. It's for my friend Summer's birthday." In which Seth says, "Uh, her birthday is not until next week," kind of in that kind of creepier way. Then he kind of then Seth walks away. Ryan says to Marissa, you should have fun at your party." And then and says something like, "Your social scene awaits." Then Marissa agrees to drive Ryan and Seth kind of to the model home, and she asks them where they're going, and she's like, "It's pretty far away." And he's and then they talk about music, or Marissa and Ryan talk about music, and she kind of asks, "Do you like the band that's playing on the radio?" And he's like, "I don't know. I think they sound okay." And then she says, "What do you like?" And he's kind of not really into the music scene. And I like the fact that Seth says, "That's weird." And Ryan says, "Well, what kind of music do you like, Marissa?" And Marissa's like, "I really like punk, Avril Lavigne." And he's like, "Avril Lavigne." And then Seth says Avril Lavigne isn't really punk, in which Marissa starts naming off bands that we find out that Seth really enjoys. The they head to the model home, and they walk in, and as they're walking in, they they say how creepy it is, and they start to kind of make suggestions on how to make this house into a home slash hideout. Meanwhile, woman's residence, Kristen is on the phone with the builders about kind of trying to get the model home finally built. She says it's been at least a month since you've been since it's been, and she leaves them a message. And then we finally get to mention that, or mention of Kristen's dad, who we get to see later on in the series. She says that my dad's never gonna let me hear the end of this. Then she mentions sort of, she asks she asks Sandy if he's talked to Seth, and and Sandy tells Kristen, "Just don't blame yourself." And Kristen is still conflicted by having Ryan um, stay in their stay in her home. She's and she still thinks Ryan is kind of still a danger, and she says that she'll do what any mother would do. Meanwhile, back at the house, they start looking around and Seth says, "Isn't this better than some group home?" And then tells him, "Wait till you see the best part." And he opens the doors to the backyard, which reveals nothing but a pool. And um, Marissa's like, "But this is just an empty pool." And he says, to some, and then Seth says, "To some, it's a skate park." And then we see Seth skateboarding while Ryan and Marissa start to have a conversation with his mom. And when she's coming back, Ryan kind of gives the spooge that uh, his mom has been in jail, or his dad's been in jail. His mom's a train wreck. I like the fact that Marissa mentions her mom and how they both have um, problems with their mothers. Um, and then we find out what Ryan's father went through. He got into jail because of armed robbery, and we find out what Marissa's dad is having trouble financially because he's a financial planner, and people from the stock trade commission has been coming around asking him questions for a while, which we kind of saw at the beginning of episode in the scenes of episode one that kind of developed Jimmy's character. The phone rings and Luke calls Marissa, and Luke is at a party, and it's the kind of the high school party. People are drinking, kind of uh, having, kind of having, having kind of fun and doing their thing. And she's like, or I miss you too. Then Ryan asks Marissa how long she's been with Luke, and Marissa says, "I don't really know, really." And then Seth butts in and says, "I knew exactly when you and Luke got together. It was fifth grade when you got your Mac on and at the back seat of the bus during a field trip." And Marissa says, "What's your deal, Cohen?" And he says, "Nothing. It's just that you've been living next door to me for the past couple years, and you haven't mentioned me at all." And I like the fact that he kind of says, she says, "Well, if you want to talk about Luke," and and Marissa said, "Talk about Luke, because he shaves his chest." And Marissa says, "Well, he plays for water polo." And it's like, we know, the water polo team, uh, we took on the water polo team. Uh, we took the water polo team in the last time when we first met him. And Ryan says, "I'm not too popular out here." And he tells Marissa that he actually hit Luke. Then they go through the house, looking around the house, kind of figuring out a way to basically camp out there. And then Summer calls Marissa and says, "Where are you? Where have you been? Where are you? You need to come down to the party." And I like the fact that Seth says, "Is that Summer?" And she's like, "Yeah," or she nods that yeah, it is Summer. And she says, tell her that Seth Cohen says hi." And she says, "Oh," she's like, "Seth Cohen says hi," and Summer's like, "Who?" And or Marissa is like, she says hi, and we see Seth get so excited. Even Ryan kind of shines the light on him, and kind of smiles for it, for Seth's success. Then they make a pact to not tell anyone that they're going to be squatting in the house. And then Marissa says we probably need to head out and get supplies, and so they leave Ryan to hang out there while Marissa and Seth head back to their respective dwellings. Then the next morning, Ryan wakes up and is kind of amazed by kind of the house that he's in. I like the fact that he looks around and he sees um, kind of the house being developed. Then Sandy goes over to the pool house and checks on Ryan to see if he's up and notices that Ryan isn't there. And then so the police arrive and Seth is on the phone with Marissa and trying to figure out how to make an how to make an escape attempt to see Ryan without running into Sandy and Karen or Kristen, Sandy and Kristen, and then the police. So Seth makes Seth tries to get out of the house and sneak his way out, but he sees Sandy and Kristen talking to the police officer, and then Marissa tries to make an escape to meet Seth, but ends up getting caught by um not caught, but mostly like getting stuck talking to Luke, who's kind of eating breakfast and saying eating breakfast and telling telling Marissa that his idea would be to go on a day date by going taking the boat out and then having lunch. And so Marissa has to kind of come up with a story to get get out of the house and not talk and try to avoid Luke. And Marissa and Luke kind of suggest that they take out his dad's boats and go water skiing and get lunch. Meanwhile, Ryan is basically at the development house doing pull-ups on one of the staffs. Being questioned. Seth is being questioned by the police about where Ryan's whereabouts are. Seth makes a comment that he was saying that he wanted to go to Tahiti, and I like how he still kind of keeps his humor in even a deep moment like this. And then, but Sandy's like, "You need to be serious about this. This is important." He's like, "Yes, I don't know where he is, and I never got the chance to know him." And then we get to kind of plot B or side plot B, if you will, where we see Marissa or Jimmy. Um, he's kind of looking over, since he's a financial planner, looking over his finances, and 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 it's kind of interesting because he's sort of dealing with this. His wife, ends up Julie comes over into Jimmy's office and asks him for a check for the stable, and which Jimmy says, "Do you think want a horse? In a few years, she wouldn't even like horses." in which Caitlin comes in and says in her riding gear, "I love China. She's the most prettiest thing ever." In which, and then Marissa or Julie shoos Caitlin to get into the car, and I like the fact that Jimmy kind of is so stressed, and he doesn't want to tell his wife that he's in financial despair. In which he kind of breaks, wants to really kind of, he doesn't want to tell her, but he does want to tell her, and lets her know, wants to let her know that they're about to be financially broken. And Kate or Julie says, "You'll figure it out. You always do," and ends up walking off. And then, meanwhile, Marissa is talking to Luke about kind of doing like massages or like um, um or no massages and or pedicures and manicures, and she's trying to get out of talking to trying to get to Luke, in which Luke kind of says, "Okay, I'm not really into the whole manicure things, and how about you, you know, how about you hang out? How about we just catch up and hang out later?" Luke says, in which so Luke leaves. Um, Seth goes over to the driveway of Marissa, and they head out to see Ryan at the um, at the model home. Ryan is putting up a tent. They're hanging out there, and you know they think they're basically glamping in the house. Um, and I like the fact that while Ryan is kind of pitching, kind of getting the tent settled, that Marissa and Ryan kind of have a moment where Marissa gives Ryan a CD that and says, "Let your education begin." Seth comes in and talks about how they're going to need supplies, so they head over to the pier, and there's this really cute moment, and you probably saw it if you remember in um, the promotions for this show, where Ryan and Marissa are bike riding together. Well, basically, Marissa's on his shoulder on a bike, which is probably dangerous, but that's not the point. So, and Seth is skateboarding. So they end up going to a restaurant. Meanwhile, Sandy's on the phone with the hospital, trying to make sure to see if Ryan might have been at the hospital or somewhere. So he's kind of worried and looking for him. And and he suggests that Seth probably knows where Ryan is. And and we kind of see that Kristen is trying to handle it, in which Sandy's like, I wish you wouldn't call the police. And which can't what Kristen says is, how many of these kids come come on your desk every day? But Sandy says this kid is different, and kind of sees a lot of himself in Ryan, and he thinks he can help him. So Jimmy calls Kristen and asks for some help with finance, and they try to hide the fact that they need to tell both their spouses that they need some help with some money. and they end up making lunch plans. Meanwhile, kind of near a at another restaurant, both 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 Marissa and Seth and Ryan are at a restaurant. They're having breakfast, and Ryan suggests that there's a guy that his mom used to date that would give him a job to make some money, and and suggests that he should go to Texas to meet her boyfriend, or kind of catch up with her boyfriend to see if he will give him a job. And Marissa says, we can probably get you some money. And so as they're talking, we see who should show up at the restaurant, but Luke and his cronies. And Marissa says, "You know what? I'll handle it." In which Ryan says, "No, I'll handle it." And she's like, "Well, you're gonna blow your cover? Just go out escape the back door. I'll give you some time." So Seth and Ryan end up walking out the back door to lose position, and then but is caught by one of the um, waitresses and tells them to use the front door. He puts on a hoodie, in which he walks out, and he almost gets there, but Seth accidentally runs into a busboy, causing the dishes to just fall down. And Seth starts to have a conversation with Luke and his group, and Luke, and so there's this funny line where Luke calls him a bad name, and and Seth says, "Well, at least I don't shave my chest." And he says, "What did you say?" And Seth says, At least I don't look good in a sweater vest." And then uh, Luke says, "You want me to break you?" But Ryan steps into the rescue, and he's got his hood up, and there's a line, because I think he said the line where he says, "You're far away from 8 Mile," which came out, I think, the year in 2002. So that's kind of a reference. So then Marissa steps in and says, "You don't need to, bully him." And I like the fact that Ryan starts laughing and he says, "You know what I don't like about rich guys? What I like about rich guys?" And he's like, "What? Nothing." And he punches him right in the face, and they end up making a break for it. He gets his bike, and they hold him. And um, Seth locks the door by using a skateboard, so they can make a clean getaway. So they ride the so Seth and Ryan end up escaping from the pier. Head back to the model home, in which we see Seth is playing a little bit of mini golf. Ryan is sitting in a lounge chair playing Game Boy Advanced. You can tell this is 2002, 2001. And Marissa shows up and tells Ryan that you probably shouldn't have had to hit him. And, she kind of sticks up for Luke by saying, "I don't even know why Luke would do such a thing like that. And Marissa stakes up with him by saying that he's just very protective. Then we hear a car pull up to the house, and Seth looks out and sees that it's his mom and Marissa's dad. They both come to the house to talk. We see uh, Kristen is looking around and sees a bunch of golf balls in which that Seth was playing with, and she says, "So those are what those contractors were doing." So Jimmy talks about how well the house is coming along that Kristen is building, and then Jimmy also mentions that this is isn't this where we had our had our first kiss, and she says, "Me too," in which kind of implies that there was a kind of a love relationship between her and Jimmy back in the past. And Marissa hears that, and she's a little bit kind of concerned. Then um, Kristen kind of cuts the chase and asks Jimmy, "Okay, what's going on?" And he says, "I'm pretty much in deep shit, and he had a really bad year at the market." And Kristen says, "Okay, how much do you need?" And Jimmy, I like the fact that Jimmy is a little bit um, scared to admit that he needs money, money from Kristen to make it. And he reveals to Kristen that he needs $100,000. And Kristen says, "Oh yeah, I can give you the money." In which Jimmy, who feels a little embarrassed to that Kristen's going to give him the money, asks him, "Well, how much do you need?" And he says, $100,000. And he still's like, "Look, I don't think you can give me the money. Don't worry about giving me the money." It's just like, "I can." And tells her that he will pay her back, but it's going to take him a couple months. So you can tell that he didn't really want to ask her for money, but he kind of reassures her that he's going to pay her back. And then I love the fact that Jimmy tries to change the subject by saying, "This place is going to be perfect." Um, and and she says, I'm hoping that it will be." And there's this moment on Marissa's face where she's like, "So my dad is having financial, just the devastation that her dad is needing financial troubles." And which um, Marissa doesn't really say anything, but kind of changes the subject. She says, "So the contractors start tomorrow," and Ryan's like, "Well, I guess I'm out. I'm homeless now." Meanwhile, Seth is at home, kind of checking out uh, plane tickets or bus tickets, one of the two. And while he is about to order them, he uh, Sandy comes in and kind of tells Seth that um, the somebody spotted Ryan, or a guy that matches his description, down by the pier today. And Ryan and tells him that we should and Sandy tells Seth that we should probably go uh, get him before the authorities come after, apprehend him first. And Seth kind of tries to say, "Look, I need to probably go," because he already knows where Ryan is. and but he ends up going with his dad to look for Ryan. Meanwhile, Marissa is at the party with Luke and her friend Summer, and Summer starts noticing that Marissa isn't really kind of having fun. Having fun is and they know I noticed that there's doing team drinking and they drink margaritas and they start having conversations and we kind of find out that Holly, her friend, is having a house party without her parents knowing because her parents are on vacation. Um, then one of um, Luke's cronies, let's say, uh, uh, talks to Luke about Ryan and how he says that we should find that punk's trailer park and burn it to the ground. And Summer, who in this part of the show is just such a secondary character, says who, and he's like Chino. He's all up in Luke's grill. I mean, they're not really hard. I like the fact that they play hard, like gangster hard, but they're not hard. But they start having a conversation about Ryan, and and Luke says, if I see Ryan ever again, I'll beat his ass. Marissa isn't kind of liking Luke's attitude, so Marissa starts to leave. Luke tries to stop her from leaving, in which Marissa says, "You don't really know him, like I know him," and how she can't be right there. So she leaves, and we're cut to. So meanwhile, Ryan or Seth and Sandy are in the car looking for Ryan. So then Seth says, "So you can run away too." And I like how Sandy says, "Promise me that no matter how hard things will get between you and our mother, if the things get hard between you and our mother, you will never run away from us." And he kind of lets him know that they will be that they'll be with them. He'll always be with them. And I like how he tries to make it so like grand, and he says, "I remember when I held you like a baby." And Seth is like, "Just take it down a notch. Look, if you run away, I'm coming with you." So you can tell that Seth or that have a really good relationship. And meanwhile, Ryan is in the house lighting candles, and he's kind of basically he's set up camp there. He unfolds his sleeping bag, and then Marissa shows up and says, "This song reminds me of you." Luke or Ryan says, "I thought you were with Luke." She says, "I was," and and Marissa just says, "Look, I just wanted to see you." And she's like telling Luke that, "Look, we're not really anything. Us and me and Luke aren't really anything." And she says, maybe Marissa could spend the night with Ryan. And Ryan is like, "This is not gonna work out. If you stay, then I don't know. It'll last this summer, but then if you go back to school, I don't know where I'll be." And and then he's kind of like he sort of doesn't know where he wants to go, and he thinks that if the cops find him, he'll have to disappear again. Ryan reminds Marissa that they're from different worlds, and that he's like, no, go, you need to go, you leave, get out of here. And so Marissa runs off crying, and as she's crying, she runs past Luke's car, and he sees Luke, and Luke kind of now knows where Marissa or where Ryan has been squatting. This gives this so then Ryan is getting ready to leave the house and kind of get together with Seth so they can make their escape, and he can start a new life in which um, start a new life. Meanwhile, while Marissa leaves and gets in her car, where we focus on Seth and Sandy as they're driving to look for Luke, or driving to look for Ryan. Marissa starts to cry in a car. So we cut back to where Ryan is uh, getting ready to leave with Seth, but he finds out that it's not Seth that's there. It's Luke and his gang. And Luke kind of says, like, "What are you doing here?" And he starts asking, like, "So what have you been doing? Why have you been hanging out with my girlfriend?" And they kind of get sort of they stand across from each other, and Luke says, "Look, I should just kill you," in which Ryan says, "Kill me and get it over with and quit talking about it." So they push and shove. They have a fight. This starts a fire because there's a cloth that he lit some candles. They fight it out, and as they're fighting it out, the fire gets hotter and hotter. The boy, the it's one man against three. As the fire goes out, they knock they knock Ryan unconscious. So his gang of cronies start running out the door, but Luke has a change of heart and ends up rescuing Ryan out of the uh, inferning house. So he drags him out. While he's dragging him out, he makes a run for it because in his pickup truck, and Ryan gets up and looks and sees sees them drive off. So meanwhile, we really get a moment with Julie and Jimmy, where they're watching in ESPN Classics, where they talk about the Lakers and the Pistons having a game, and there's the mentions that this was like a 1986 game, in which this is when Julie was pregnant with Marissa. And so this is I like this scene because this is where they can kind of have a real couple scene. Um, because then this first two episodes of the OC, Julie kind of really makes Jimmy kind of a little bit more kind of more as sort of kind of walks on him a little bit. Then Jimmy mentions to Julie uh, that the thing that he needed to take care of, he took care of it. That's the way that um, uh, Kristen has been helping Jimmy with their finance. So Marissa um, walks in tears and goes up to her room. Jimmy takes the time and says, "Okay," or takes time, and I'll go up. And Marissa's crying. So Jimmy goes up to Marissa's room. Marissa's crying on her bed, and um, Jimmy and Marissa sort of hug, and he tries to be the best father he can, and tries to make everything okay. Meanwhile, Ryan or Sandy gets a phone call about the fire that happened at the house. Um, Luke and his cronies come back to the party, and he asked Summer if Marissa showed back up, in which Marissa said no, Marissa showed back up, in which Summer says no. Then Luke's posse asked Luke, um, "Do you think the kid's gonna be Chino's gonna be okay?" And Luke's kind of tries to reassure himself that he was breathing, and they say, "I hope so." Back at the so Sandy and Seth end up driving to the model house that's just been burnt, and Kristen looks at it and says, "This house is cursed." In which Sandy and then the police officers show up and say that someone has been living. Seth uh, spills the beans that it's his fault that he has been letting Ryan live there for a couple days. And meanwhile, Chino or Ryan is out on the street trying to hitchhike back to wherever he needs to go. And cars pass by, but then another car passes by, another car, another car, and then a black truck stops. And Ryan is so grateful. And then he's totally disappointed because it's Luke, and he's all right. And which Ryan says, you seem disappointed." And he says, "Look, they can't trace us." And then Ryan or Luke tells Ryan that they can't trace us to that fire. And Ryan, so meanwhile, so Ryan's getting a ride, but with Luke. Seth is talking to his dad about Ryan basically squatting at the rental house, or the 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 rental house, or the big house that remodeled house, excuse me. And Ryan and Sandy's like, "Why didn't you tell us that Ryan's been squatting there?" And she was and Seth is like, "Well, he didn't want to be thrown out into a foster home." Sandy tells Seth that the police are going to ask them more questions. The police are there. They're kind of waiting around to see if Ryan's going to show back up. Then then Seth and his dad come out, and he basically spills the truth about what really happened to the police. And as he's talking to the police, Buck pulls up, and out comes Luke and Ryan, and Ryan ends up looking for an apology for Seth, Sandy, and Kristen, but he just knows that it's not going to work out. So he just puts his hand behind his back, and he ends up headed back to jail. But then but then Luke says to tells the police officer, he fesses up and says, "I was there too." And he says, "Well, you're gonna." Then the police officer says, "Well, you're gonna have to come with us anyway." He gets arrested too, and they're headed to jail. End of episode. So that was the model home episode 2 of one of the OC. I like this episode because we see the kind of the strength of the relationship between Ryan and Seth really gets stronger in this episode. I also like that Luke is sort of um, Luke is kind of we throughout the episode throughout the first season, I think he changes from a bully to be a little bit more of a happier kid, especially in the second season. But this one, he still kind of is the bully character for Ryan, and the fact that he fests up, and he does. I like the fact that his character does go through an arc in this episode where even though he hates him, he doesn't want to see him dead. I like that. I like Mirisa and Ryan, we see their relation, it's more about their relationship as well, where it's kind of developed into something more, kind of slowly developing into something more romantic than friendship. And I think this episode really works. I think it's still we're still trying to figure out how this how the show is working, but it's a really good episode. I like it. I think it works. I give it a probably a 7 out of 10. I think it's a pretty strong episode from the pilot. Let me know if you've seen this episode before and what your thoughts are on it. As always, I'm Steve, and like and subscribe, and see you at the movies. Bye.